what has happened in the last 24 hours. We had on Tuesday, we had 5 tankers trying to pass through the Strait of Hormuz using the southern part of the strait close to the Omani border. Then they were hit by Iranians. These tankers uh, belong to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and UAE. They were hit by Iranians. Then, right after the attack, we've heard from U.S. Treasury Secretary that they lifted the sanctions on Iranian oil sector and energy sector. They put back the sanctions on Iran. So after 6 days of relieving or withdrawing or removing the sanctions on Iran and lifting the sanctions, they put it back on Iran again. Then at night, Tuesday night, the United States attacked Iran in southern part of Iran, basically hitting the same sort of targets they had before. And they said they hit something like 80 targets in the southern part of Iran. Then we had the Iranian retaliation in Kuwait and Bahrain. The second, what has happened yesterday with Donald Trump in NATO, he was coming out. He was so angry with Iranian. This is the cancer. The MOU is over. I'm gonna finish the job as he said it yesterday. And then they attacked Iran last night. It was escalated. It was reported by New York Times more than 170 missiles they used last night or targets. They hit 170 targets in the southern part of Iran. And then what is so important that they hit one of the bridges. The bridge is so important because that bridge connects Iran to China in the northern part of Iran. And the other bridge is between Tehran and Mashhad, which connects Tehran to Mashhad. And they have a funeral today in Mashhad. More than 8 million people right now are in Mashhad in the funeral procession. So this is on the part of the United States. Last night, Iran started attacking Jordan, Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain. And it continued until this morning here in Brazil. It was at 7:30 a.m., which would be 8:30 your time in the east coast of the United States. They were hitting some targets in Jordan. They used 10 ballistic missiles to hit the targets, the U.S. base in Jordan. This is the outcome. Right now, the United States is telling us, Donald Trump says that in the coming, Axios reported that the United States is planning for 4 to 5 weeks or maybe 2 months war, all-out war, as they call it. Iran is prepared. What's going on in Iran? With the border with Iraqi Kurdistan, they sent a lot of troops there from the army, from IRGC to control the border because they're feeling that maybe the United States is trying to do some sort of incursion from that part, from these terrorist groups in Iraqi Kurdistan. So this is the atmosphere in Iran while they're having the funeral. I think Iran last night didn't respond the way that they wanted to respond because of the funeral that was happening. It was in Iraq, by the way, and today is in Iran. And tonight it's going to be over. The funeral going to be over, and they're going to get back to the fight. This is the situation right now, Richard. As the two sides, Israeli government, the Israeli media just 20 minutes, 30 minutes ago reported that Israel is preparing for war. And they're prepared to get back to the war. It's a huge sort of gift for Benjamin Netanyahu, the war, getting back to the war. Your understanding, Richard, of what's going on?
Okay, I think that what we're seeing is the disintegration of the whole arrangements, if you like, that were made after World War II, that were sustained after the 1970s, because by then, Germany, Japan had recovered, and so they could be sustained a little longer by some expedient measures that were interesting. And if we had time, I would talk about them. But European and American economics was really in trouble in the 1970s and had to be rescued. They had a generation of rebuilding from World War II, The United States was dominant. The United States financed and provided for the rebuilding of Europe and Japan, and so on. The but underneath that, which was a kind of superficial prosperity because it was government financed and all of that, there was a terrible problem, and the terrible problem was the loss of the colonial system. World Wars One and Two ended the colonial program, and I want people to understand that for centuries the colonies had been a subsidy to European capitalism. Try to keep in mind, Belgium is a small country. The Congo in Africa is a huge country. So the Belgian capitalism could survive because it had an enormous infusion of wealth, surplus produced in and out of the colonies and by means of the colonies. And that was true for England and France and even for Germany until it lost its colonies as a result. So the wars are a fantastic end. They are the end of the colonial system, and they are the mutual destruction of all the colonial empires that capitalism had enabled, with one exception, the United States. By virtue of the two oceans and the fact that air power had not yet developed, we were able to escape most of the damage. The bombs fell on Pearl Harbor, but never again, nowhere else. No railways gone, no factories gone. Not only that, but in the crazy way of American capitalism, the war got us out of the Depression. The economy was in better shape in 1945 than it had been in 1929 when it went into its collapse. That's why it is so strange for people to not understand that Russia has done better in this war than they were doing before, because the war is a stimulus. And that's not a surprise. It can be if you have a certain configuration of your situation. And the Russians are different from the U.S. in 1929, but they also have the ability to stimulate their economy, and that's what they have done. That's why their growth rates are as impressive during these 4 years of war as they are. Okay, what sustained European capitalism once the colonies are gone, once they've got the little boost from Reconstruction 1945 to 1975, is interesting. Here's what it is. It's a combination of an explosion of credit to give masses of people credit in a way they had never had before. The modern credit card that sits in everybody's wallet, that's a creation of the 1970s. Before that, we didn't have anything like that. And the second thing was bringing masses of poor people from the global south as immigrants into the capitalist Europe, an infusion of cheap labor. You couldn't go to where the cheap workers were. Colonialism is finished. So you had to bring them in, which they did, until that was no longer possible because of the reaction of the local workers who took a while but figured out this was not good for them. This was good for the employer, but not good for the employee. Now they can't do that anymore. That's over. Here in the United States, we take the lead. We deport millions of immigrants. We're not getting that support anymore. And the credit is used up. There's not much more to go there. And here I come now. There is desperation. What else is going to sustain this economic system? And I think in the case of Europe, it is a fantasy. Here comes the fantasy. We are going to go to war against Russia. We're going to bring the United States, desperate like we are, into this war. We're going to remove Russia from the ranks of the great powers. That's John Mearsheimer's explanation. But for me, coming out of the Marxian tradition, I see the goal as break up Russia into half a dozen small countries and make them the new colonial program for Europe and the United States. What they have done to Eastern Europe since 1990 will now be extended into all of Russia. And it becomes reasonable to provoke Russia over and over again in the direction of a war because they have no other option. I mean, the European leaders are in an impossible situation. The United States has withdrawn the support, the subsidies, the military overhang, paying for it all. They don't have cheap energy from Russia anymore, and they have, for their exports, the competition of China, which is overwhelming them. They have nothing. Everything looks terrible for them. They are already having virtually no growth. Volkswagen has meetings in the United States to see whether they should move their headquarters. What? They just shut the United States just shut the American market for automobiles. No Chinese cars, not just BYD, but today they shut out Geely, which owns Polestar in Sweden, and those cars can't come to the United States. You're watching the United States turn in on itself because it can't cope with a world of free trade. It's finished. It is desperate. And these are the signs, for me, of a desperate effort to see if Israel can somehow manage the Middle East so it's a appropriate field for the situation to be recouped by controlling the oil above all else, but also by this attack on Russia in the hopes of taking, and let's remember, Russia doesn't have to go after colonies because the Asian part of Russia is the future for Russia, which Russia has told us. They're pivoting to Asia. They are the biggest country by geography anyway, and the vast reaches of Asia have never been developed. So they don't have to go anywhere else. They don't have to impinge elsewhere. They don't have the situation. And by virtue of the power of the state, they are much more fluid and flexible as to how they use their surplus and where they invest it. It's not driven by private profit. It's driven by a larger viewpoint, which in the current situation is by far the safer prospect. So to be honest, as I mentioned before we went on the air, for me, as I watch daily events, I think there's a greater danger of World War III coming out of Europe's provocations against Israel, against Russia, than there is even around the volatile Middle East, Iran, and Israel.
Michael, you sent me an article of Saudi Arabia, which was published recently. It shows how Saudi Arabia played a role in that Operation Freedom that the United States wanted to do. By the way, what they're trying to do right now is something similar to Operation Freedom. You remember that.
This is
And
a continuation
to
of it.
use the warships in the Strait of Hormuz to help these tankers to pass through, and this is the game right now. What is in that article that is of importance in your opinion?
I do want to explain that, but I want to comment that I support the two major points that Richard's made, and they're connected to Operation Freedom. The first major point he made was how World War II ended the European colonialism. The second point he made was how important the war by the EU and the United States directly with Russia is. And I agree with both points that they're critical. But the ending of European colonialism didn't really end with World War II, especially in the OPEC countries, and especially in what became the United Arab Emirates. because that was Britain sort of established the ruling clan and gave its members, as I'm sure you know well enough, control of Bahrain, the Emirates, Abu Dhabi, the whole group. And as the United States absorbed the British Empire, and ultimately, after supporting the French Empire in Southeast Asia, absorbed it, the United States absorbed the European, French and British colonialism in West Asia. And that included the overthrow of the elected government of Mossadegh in Iran, the installation of the Shah, and all of that. The real end of European colonialism in the region that we're talking about, the Near East, was the war, the war between Egypt and Israel in 1973. And that's when President Nixon suggested we've got to invade Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia was leading the Arab oil embargo against oil sales to the United States. It was Britain at that time that actually tried to talk Nixon out of the invasion of West Asia by saying exactly what was going to happen, that it would destabilize the region, it would galvanize the whole region against not only the United States, but Europe. This memo was declassified 30 years later, as happened under British law, and was all reviewed. And it's very significant that last Sunday, as you just mentioned, the official Saudi site, website, gave the whole story of why Trump's Operation Freedom was aborted. And this story had not been told before, and the article provided the whole logic for what happened. On May 3rd, Trump had given a public speech. He's going to imminently attack Iran. He did not consult with Saudi Arabia or any of the other OPEC countries. He just said they would counterattack it. Saudi Arabia saw that if the United States attacked Iran, Iran was going to retaliate, and it would retaliate against any Arab OPEC country that had a U.S. military base in it, like Saudi Arabia. And they saw exactly what would happen. So the prince, Crown Prince, blocked the United States from using Saudi airspace, and he negotiated with Kuwait. The Kuwait forbid the United States to fly over its territory also, or to use the airbase. That grounded 43 American warplanes that were stationed in the Prince Sultan air base in Saudi Arabia. And within hours of this, Trump announced that he wasn't going to be able to do it. Well, all of this wasn't mentioned at the time. So what Trump said was, well, Pakistan has asked us to keep trying to mediate, so I'm suspending everything. But that was only the cover story. The fact is that Tehran said, you cannot use our bases to attack us. And that is what held back the U.S. attack on Iran until June 11th, which is what ultimately led to the Memorandum of Understanding. But in this article, it spelled out a number of things. It pointed out that in Saudi Arabia's view of the whole Near Eastern geopolitics, All of this goes back to 1973. The article highlighted the fact that the Saudi crown prince views Israel as the major danger to Saudi Arabia. And I'm sure that that was partly just politically. He didn't want to come out and say that criticize the United States. The article said that day after day, again and again, President Trump kept calling the crown prince, saying, won't you let our aircraft land? Again and again, Saudi Arabia said no. They had Rubio, they had Vance, and everybody calling him. He held his ground and said, you cannot fly over our territory. We will not support you. All of this was not revealed until the Saudi Arabia revealed it last Sunday, and I think is a warning to set the stage for all of this. It was published by the Saudi site, which is the House of Saud, and the article sort of gave the whole background. And after this 4-day stoppage, then the United States, quite furious, and Saudi Arabia sought to ameliorate things by arranging the largest arms purchase in American history, 142 billion of U.S. arms Saudi Arabia promised to buy. Well, the article points out that, the Crown Prince knew that the United States doesn't have the productive capacity to produce more Patriot missiles or all of the other arms. It takes years and years to begin providing these, and the actual money won't be paid to the United States until the arms are delivered many years down. And the article pointed out that Saudi Arabia said, we're not going to be able to get these arms in time for us to actually use them. So it's not going to help us at all. But the big conclusion was repeated in the article that the Crown Prince says having a U.S. military base in our country is a threat to our security. The promise was that the U.S. military bases were going to be supportive of, protect us against whom? Well, presumably Iran. Well, this whole idea that it's Saudi Arabia against the United States and Israel, at that time, remember, the Iran under the Shah was also unfriendly with Saudi Arabia because the Shah of Iran refused to join the Arab oil embargo